if I'm reading you correctly, I don't think you would go with the idea of him being an illiterate orphan.
No, not at all.
No.
This...
That bit I think is totally implausible, but I do think it makes more sense for him to be from a privileged background, because then he has a voice that people are willing to follow, and that, you know, like in the way Sebius talks about him ordering people to come together, like that fits with someone who's kingly.
Yes, but not necessarily a king, because a lot of the Quran, the early verses of the Quran, tell a very human story of a man preaching and being ridiculed and mocked and insulted, and he seems very alone. It talks about his depression quite a lot, and there are dozens of verses in the Quran in which God reassures him not to be depressed, not to be downcast. So he's not. It doesn't sound like a king in a palace. He sounds like he's out there on the street trying to win people over to his religious ideas, and he's not having much success, and that seems to go on for quite a long time. So that, I don't necessarily have him down as a king, but he's sufficiently privileged that he's read all these books, and then he's obviously got some. He's able to take advantage of the situation. Well, he has some noble breeding.
Well, one thing I do, maybe that would go along with what you're saying, is my reading of the situation is from the historical person, I believe, from 618 to 622 was essentially deposed from his governorship of the Lakhmid area. So he would have fitted that description of someone who, you know, had an uphill battle to kind of...
Yeah, somebody down on his luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to regain. Yes, it would be. Okay, that's 634. 636, there are reports of a great battle. It's described as a battle of Yarmouk. I'm not sure that I necessarily buy into all the descriptions of it, but relying upon, you have to help me out here. Who wrote In God's Path?
Robert Hoyland.
Robert Hoyland, In God's Path. He's convinced that the Battle of Yarmouk took place, that something happened there. Yarmouk, by the way, is a river valley that's close to due east of the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
Then 638, Sophronius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, makes a note in his Christmas sermon that the godless Saracens have captured Bethlehem, and he says he can't even travel on the road to go to Bethlehem, so he has to celebrate Christmas in Jerusalem of Italy. So looking at this, it seems like if you just look at the evidence out here on a map, that the net is closing in on Jerusalem. Somebody is out there, somebody is doing something, somebody's zoning in on that place.
Yeah.
Then Bethlehem is about 6 miles, as I understand it. Bethlehem is about 6 miles from Jerusalem, sufficiently close that people walk there on Christmas Eve in a procession. And halfway along that route, there is a ruined church called the Church of the Kathisma. I'd like to have a quick excursus here, a little exploration of the Church of the Kathisma, because this is a fascinating clue in the story.
Absolutely.
In Surah 19, verse 22 and 26, Mary gives birth to Jesus not in Bethlehem, but in a place far off. She does it when the pangs of childbirth come upon her. So she's out of position. No sign of Joseph, by the way, no mention of Joseph one way or the other. But she seems to be on her own, far from anywhere, and she has to give birth and manage as best she can. Then the newborn baby Jesus commands a date palm tree to bend down and offer its fruit to his mother, and also for a spring of water to appear at her feet. I'll refer to the first part of this as the miracle of the date palm. Well, the story of Mary giving birth in a place far off, or a place that wasn't Bethlehem, in the wild, is contained in an apocryphal gospel known as the Proto-Evangelium of James. So this isn't new to the Qur'an. This was already a Christian tradition, although not one that was accepted in the Bible. And various Christian traditions also record a miracle of a palm tree, of the child Jesus, not a baby, but a child. Actually, it would have been a baby, requiring a palm tree to bend down and offer its fruit to Mary. But these traditions all place this event as occurring during the flight into Egypt, which of course took place shortly after the birth of Jesus. Well, Stephen Shoemaker wrote an excellent article called Christmas in the Qur'an, not to be confused by a book that's been published under the same name. Stephen Shoemaker's Christmas in the Qur'an explores the Church of the Kathisma and makes some very interesting findings. He finds that this is where the Jerusalem church first celebrated Christmas Mass, following the Proto-Evangelium of James. So before the Bible became canonized, the Christians of Jerusalem used to come out in procession, not to go to Bethlehem, but to go to this church. And there they would celebrate the spot where it was believed that Mary gave birth out in the wilds before she got to Bethlehem. When the church overall decided that the Gospel of Matthew was going to be one of the 4 official Gospels of the New Testament, and the Proto-Evangelium of James was rejected, the Jerusalem church had to find a purpose for this church that they'd gone to celebrate the Christmas Mass. And suddenly it was a church without a purpose. So what they did was they rededicated it to the miracle of the palm tree. They said, well, maybe we got the story a bit wrong. We can change the story slightly and say this must have been where Mary rested on the way out of, not on the way to Bethlehem, but on the way out of Bethlehem when she was on the flight to Egypt. It's not actually on the way to Egypt, but that's easily explained because she's taking a roundabout route to avoid Herod, to avoid drawing attention to herself. He also points out that excavation of the ruins has shown that it was actually used as a mosque. There are signs that somebody has chiseled a prayer niche into the walls, facing, as it happens, as Dan Gibson would tell us, towards Petra. But there's a little prayer niche in the wall, so we know that it was a mosque. And some of the mosaics, they think, are Arab mosaics, not Christian ones, not Jewish ones. So, the conclusion that one can reach, that Shoemaker reaches, is that these 2 elements of the Quran's nativity story, the giving birth in a far-off place and the miracle of the date palm, are united in this church, and that this church is located on the very road where Sophronius said that the Arab raiders were in his sermon of 638. And also he points out that this was used as a mosque. And he draws the inference, and I draw the inference, that whoever wrote the Quran came upon this church and got these 2 stories from this one place. If one imagines, as I did before, if one imagines it was a coincidence, what are the chances that someone somewhere else combined these 2 stories, and then when they invaded Palestine, they found a church in which these 2 stories had come together? It just seems precisely the spot, down to almost within the mile of where Sophronius said that they were. It just sounds too much of a coincidence for the Quran to have combined these stories independently of the church, and then come across a church that combines the 2 stories.
Interesting theory now. Yeah, I do think this church was very famous at the time and would have been familiar to a lot of Arabs, not just Christian Arabs, but other Arabs as well, because it held a lot of significance for
Well, it's
people.
true. Stephen Shoemaker finds a pilgrim guide that he dates to 570, I think, which is actually the year that Muhammad was traditionally born. So he finds a pilgrimage guide which shows that it must have been a place of some importance, in which it says this is the spot where the miracle of the palm tree took place.
It probably was the equivalent of somewhere like Lourdes or Fatima today. At that time, in that location, it would have been a big pilgrimage site.
And if, of course, one is interested in coincidences, we shouldn't really let it, shouldn't move on without noticing that it's an regular eight-sided church based around an unhewn stone, which is exactly what we see in the Dome of the Rock later on. So it's not, what the significance of that is, I'm not quite sure. I don't think anyone used to circumambulate this stone, but it is a curious coincidence.
I would argue that it was probably the inspiration for the design of the Dome of the Rock.
I agree, in which case it was important.
Yeah.
I would also point out that if this is correct, then this is it's not really of any great interest to Jews, because Jews will respect Jesus, but they're not particularly bothered about the spot where Jesus was born. Christians have sort of moved on. We're not so bothered about it. But this is really far more interesting to Islam than the Dome of the Rock, which is far less important than the birthplace of Jesus. And it's lying there completely neglected. I wonder if the Israelis, if they're looking at a peace treaty with the Palestinians, might consider throwing this in and see if it would sweeten the deal a bit. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it would suggest to me that people involved were Abrahamists, because the Abrahamists were not just concerned with the Jewish heritage, but they picked up Christian interests or elements of the Christian faith, let's say, entered into the Abrahamist religion sometime before the 7th century. So that might be part of the fascination with that church, even though they wouldn't necessarily believe Jesus was, well, they didn't believe Jesus was the Son of God, but they still held on to some Christian elements. Right.
So then the next thing that happens is it's a little bit, the history is a little bit hazy. We don't have a good eyewitness record of it, but around about 638, probably the end of the year, or maybe within a year, the following year, or possibly the year after that, Jerusalem falls to the Arabs, or they come to a deal with the people in Jerusalem who hand the city over to the Arabs. So I would say this is, I've laid out all these, rather like a detective laying out all the clues on the table here. I think you could look at all this and you could almost literally join the dots, that there may have been a pledge of loyalty by the Jews at Aqaba. It may have gone to Yathrib, and then they've come up the Red Sea, landed at Ayla, spent some time ravaging Gaza, gathering strength, gaining resources. A Byzantine army or some sort of Byzantine force has come down to confront them. They've confronted that at 634, been successful. By 638, they've got Bethlehem, and they're besieging Jerusalem, which falls later that year. I think it tells its own story, and of course, it's got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Mecca, which is sat down there, completely neglected. No record of that having played any role in these events at all.
Absolutely.
Right, we now move on to another. I've got three texts I'm going to ask you to read. This is a note that was made in a page of a Gospel of St. Mark, which is kept at the British Museum. And these are lines that are written on it, and they don't seem to have any particular purpose, but they seem to be copied from a chronicle that we've now lost. And one person's suggestion was, it seems to be as good as anyone else's, is that somebody was testing a new pen and wrote out a line or a few lines from a chronicle onto this gospel. But it is now gives us an apparently the second reference to Muhammad, if the first is by Thomas the Presbyter. This is our second historic reference to Muhammad.
Okay. In January, the people of Homs took the word for their lives, and many villages were ravaged by the killing of ... Muhammad and many people were slain and taken prisoner from Galilee as far as Beth, possibly Lehem. At the turn of the year, the Romans came. On the 20th of August in the year 7, there gathered in Gabata the Romans, and many people were killed, some 50,000.
So a scrap of evidence, but again, it seems to corroborate what I suggested on the previous map. You've got many people were slain and taken prisoner near Galilee, which is exactly where the River Yarmouk Valley is found. And as far as Beth, the word tails off, maybe it's illegible, but that could so easily be Bethlehem. It's exactly what one would expect to find from my map on the previous page.
And possibly Gabata might be Yarmouk. That be right?
I don't know. I hadn't made that connection.
I vaguely remember seeing some connection. I think it might be in Robert Hoyland, but I'd have to double check. But I think that might be another connection. But if I'm wrong, I'll put a little note in the comment section.
Then we have the Doctrina Iacobi, which is it's not a real testimony of a Jew. It's a purported testimony of a Jew called Jacob, who had been forcibly converted to Christianity, which, as you pointed out, corroborates the Pseudo-Sebius's account of Jews being forced to convert.
Okay.
And then Jacob comes along to, having been forced to become a Christian, he then likes it and he voluntarily, genuinely embraces it, and he's now trying to persuade all the other Jews to embrace it. Okay.
When the candidate was killed by the Saracens, people were saying the candidatus has been killed, and we Jews were overjoyed. And they were saying that the prophet had appeared coming with the Saracens, and that he was proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. I stopped by a certain old man well versed in scriptures, and I said to him, "What can you tell me about the prophet who has appeared with the Saracens?" He replied, groaning deeply, "He is false, for the prophets do not come armed with a sword."
So there we have more evidence of fighting taking place in the region. It mentions a prophet. It doesn't mention Muhammad by name, but it's evidence that there was a religious movement. There was religious and military at the same time, which is exactly what I'm postulating was happening with the besieging of Jerusalem. Proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ. This causes some people puzzlement. They say, well, what does this really mean? Because Muhammad isn't, the Qur'an does talk about Jesus coming again, but not quite like this describes. I wonder if the Christ is actually a Greek term, because a Greek term that was adopted to make sense of what Muhammad was actually saying, which is that he was the Hamed, the chosen one. But that's possibly something for another day.
Well, I would support that. The thing that occurs to me is that he is coming with the Saracens. You know, and appeared with the Saracens. It seems to, maybe I'm reading into it, but it seems to indicate that he's not a Saracen himself. it's kind of a weird way of putting it. So one possibility might be that he is in some way an outsider. There might be a case that perhaps he's on that borderline between Persia and Arabia in the Euphrates region.
But of course, what is a Saracen? That's, the term Saracen is itself somewhat slippery.
I think. That's true, yeah. So perhaps he wasn't viewed entirely as an Arab. Perhaps he was viewed as, in some way, more a Persian than an Arab. Like there is a Chinese chronicle that suggests that. Now, I'm not fully bought on that idea, but it is a possibility that's there.
And just make that. Just note that this is 640, so very fresh. It doesn't mention Muhammad by name, but this is within 8 years of the reported death of Muhammad, and possibly I would suggest that possibly Muhammad was actually still alive at this stage.
Yeah,
on to that. And finally, we have something that is described as the Syriac common source. It is a source, it's a chronicle that we've now lost, but we find extracts of it or bits of it in 4 different chronicles. So we assume that Stephen Shoemaker has pieced this together. So I ask if you can read this.
This Muhammad, while in the measure and stature of youth, began to go up and down from his city Yathrib to Palestine for the business of buying and selling. And when he wanted to prove his word, he led a band of those who were obedient to him, and he began to go up and plunder the land of Palestine, taking captives and pillaging. And he returned laden with booty and unharmed, and he did not fall short in his promise to them. And when those who were not yet following him saw those who had submitted to him becoming wealthy, with an abundance of riches, they were drawn to his service without compulsion. And when after these raids, the men following him became numerous and were a main force, he no longer went forth, but allowed them to raid while he sat in honor in Yathrib, his city. Okay,
so again, it's not exactly what I'm saying, but it is broadly consistent with it. It's got Muhammad based in Yathrib, that's his stronghold, that's where he's found, and he uses that as a base to go up and plunder the land of Palestine. And that would, if I was doing that trip, I would try and go by boat if I could, and I would suggest that he sails up the Gulf of Aqaba, which drops him off at precisely the spot of the Ayla Mosque. That would be my thesis as to what was really going on here.
Yeah, I wonder about this location, Yathrib. I think if we take my other idea about Muhammad being from in northern Mesopotamia, Yathrib could be a location on the Euphrates. But in either case, the distance is about the same. I don't think it particularly changes things, but I think if he were a king, I think these expeditions to Palestine were a much more major event. They weren't just the work of a few people, but maybe say the actions of a king who had perhaps dozens, hundreds perhaps, doing these raids as part of...
Thomas the Presbyter describes him as raiding villages and so on. So I think that's broadly consistent. And anyway, that's what I take from that. Okay, it follows from what I'm saying, of course, that if the Masjid al-Haram is the Temple Mount, and I think I've presented some information there that strongly supports this, that Muhammad must have actually made it. He must have actually occupied Jerusalem. This seems to follow. Follows that Muhammad was alive at the Battle of Yarmouk, and I wonder if this was the surprise victory that was celebrated in Surahs 8 and Surah 47. There's not much really to go on, except that Surah 8, I think verse 11, refers to God sending down water as a blessing for his fighters, and and this is understood as making the ground soft for the Meccans to be fighting on. According to Ibn Ishaq, he said the water somehow firmed up Muhammad's position and made the position of his enemies kind of boggy and weighed them down. And that's actually quite similar to the account of the Battle of Yarmouk, which is that the Byzantine army got stuck in the mud by the riverbank and weren't able to move and were slaughtered there. So there's a slight coincidence there, but either way, if the Battle of Yarmouk happened and if the Masjid al-Haram is Temple Mount, then Muhammad was alive at this point and probably out there in the battle.
Yeah. And
then, of course, Muhammad must have been alive and Quran verses announced after the capture of Jerusalem. So we have, for example, Surah 9 verse 7. How can the idolaters have a treaty with God and with his messenger, save for those with whom you made a treaty at the Masjid al-Haram? If they remain true to you, remain true to them. Truly God loves the reverent. So here we have a Quran verse announced at a time when the believers have possession of the Masjid al-Haram, or at least they're there because they're signing a treaty there. And the treaty doesn't last terribly long, because by verse 28 it reads, "O you who believe, the idolaters are surely unclean, so let them not come near the Masjid al-Haram after this year of theirs. If you fear poverty, God will enrich you from his bounty, if you will. God is truly knowing wise, or truly God is knowing wise." So at this point, the Muslims or the followers of Muhammad are expelling some people, the idolaters, from the Masjid al-Haram, which inevitably means that they have occupation of it and control of that site. Is that possible? Is that possible? Yes, it's absolutely possible. 638, Sophronius. We go back to Sophronius, a guy who couldn't get to Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas Mass. He makes a note about what happened when the godless Saracens entered the holy city. I don't know if you want to help me out on this.
Yeah. The godless Saracens entered the holy city of Christ our Lord, Jerusalem, with the permission of God and in punishment for our negligence, which is considerable, and immediately proceeded in haste to the place which is called the capital. They took with them men, some by force, others by their own will, in order to clean that place and to build that cursed thing intended for their prayer, and which they call a mosque.
Okay, so 638, immediately after the conquest of Jerusalem, we have some sort of religious building, some place of prostration, being built on Temple Mount, which I think shows that this was the focus of the attacking side.
Yeah, yeah.
Back to the Armenian Chronicle of Pseudo-Sebius. He takes a story forward. If Sophronius tells us about the building, Pseudo-Sebios has a slight twist on this. He said, "We heard this account from men from captivity in Khuzestan who described themselves as eyewitnesses to the events, and they narrated them to us.
Now I shall speak about the plot of the Jewish rebels who, finding support from the Hagarenes for a short time, planned to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. Locating the place called the Holy of Holies, they constructed the temple with a pedestal to serve as their place of prayer. But the Ishmaelites envied the Jews, expelled them from the place, and named the same building their own place of prayer." That's good support for your theory.
There's some conflict between what Sophronius says and what Pseudo-Sebius says. I would go with Sophronius because he's sat there. He's in Jerusalem. Pseudo-Sebius is over in Armenia. So I think I would have to Sophronius on this debate, but both sides have this idea that that they're building a holy place in the Jew that and that the attackers are building a place on Temple Mount, and what Pseudo-Sebios says fits in, I think, with my with what I suggested, that that there was what I call the Abrahamic alliance between Israelites and Ishmaelites, and the Jews built this temple, and then that was possibly at the time of the revocation of the treaty, described in Surah 9:28. They were then unceremoniously booted out, and the Quran author says, "I'll take things from here." They were stabbed in the back, I suppose you would say.
Yeah.
So Sophronius has described the first Saracen structure on Temple Mount. The story shifts to Iona in Scotland, where the abbot of Iona receives a pilgrim called Arculf, and Arculf describes his journeys, including a description of the Temple Mount, and this is 670, so probably about 30 or 40 years after the fall of Jerusalem.
However, in the celebrated place where once stood the temple, situated towards the east near the wall, arose in its magnificence. The Saracens now have a quadrangular prayer house. They built it by erecting upright boards and great beams on some ruined remains. The building, it is said, can accommodate 3,000 people at once.
Right. To me, this shows that the early structure was probably replaced by a second structure, or maybe supplemented by a second structure. I attach some interest, or I have some interest with the word quadrangular there.
Yeah.
It's an odd word. It's not a word I've ever come across, or I'm not sure if I've come across before. I have to go back to my O-level maths. But could that possibly indicate a cube? I don't know. It's four sides. I don't know. It seems an odd word to find there. My theory that the early Quranic community was concerned with recapturing the house of gods, which was a cube, seems to me to fit that rather well. A quadrangular may be the word that was chosen.
The image that you showed earlier on in one of the first slides you showed of the Feast of Booths was quadrangular. So the cube was one end where the Holy of Holies was kept. But if you look at the full length of the building, that would be quadrangular.
That is true, yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that could be what he's referring to there.
And then just a couple of decades later, 690, we get by 690, because we don't know when the Dome of the Rock was built. The famous date that we have, 690 or 691, was the date of the inscriptions on it. We don't know if the building may have been built at an earlier stage. But we have the Dome of the Rock, which still stands splendid over Jerusalem to this day. Just make another point that for all this activity, no reference to anything being built in Mecca until no reference to Mecca at all until 741. It's clearly not where the action is. All the action is in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock is this magnificent octagonal building, looking very like the Church of the Kathisma, except now with this one we know it has a large dome and an ambulatory that you walk round this rock. A shrine designed to allow worshippers to circumambulate the highest point of Mount Moriah, the traditional site of Abraham's preparedness to sacrifice his son. So actually, it's not really the Dome of the Rock at all. It isn't a rock they are walking round. It is the highest natural point of the mountain that is underneath that whole platform structure that they built the first and second temples on, and then the dome. So it seems nobody knows if Abraham ever did prepare to sacrifice his son. But if you were going to believe that story, and if you were going to choose a particular mountain to associate it with, I think you choose the pinnacle. You go to the very top and say, this is the point he would have chosen. So it looks as though it's a shrine. To me, it looks as though it was designed as a shrine to the Abraham's obedience.
I would agree with you there on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Ibn Ishaq records the story of the night journey based upon Surah 17:1. Glory be to him who carried his servant by night from the Masjid al-Haram to the furthest mosque, whose precincts we have blessed, that we might show him some of our signs. Truly, he is a hearer, the seer. And Ibn Ishaq tells this story that is very well known, that Muhammad was carried on a winged horse from Mecca to Temple Mount, and then ascends from there to heaven and goes through the seven heavens, meeting prophets as he goes, ultimately talking to God, and then having a bit of a debate and a negotiation with God about the number of prayers before coming home again. I would say that's quite apart from the implausibility, which I say I'm not particularly interested in whether a religious story is plausible or not, if it's a genuine religious story. It simply does not fit the evidence. It fails to explain the design of this shrine. Why on earth would anyone want to circle round and round this rock or the top of the mountain that Muhammad may possibly have ascended from? The rock seems the least important part of the whole story. There's nowhere in the Arabian Peninsula, nowhere anywhere in the world that is honoured in this way for Muhammad. They haven't bothered preserving his house. They haven't bothered preserving the point where he delivered the Qur'an from in Medina or in Mecca. There's no spot where someone can say, "Oh, he stood here," and then everyone builds a shrine over it. Catholics would do this. You show us a rock and tell us that Jesus or Mary or Joseph of Arimathea stood there, and we'll build a shrine around it. But there's no tradition of the Muslims doing that anywhere else. This shrine does not fit. You wouldn't walk around it. You might pray at it from a distance. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not mentioned in the inscription that goes around the outside. There's a long inscription, or not long. There's an inscription that goes round the walkway. It makes no references, no inclusions of Surah 17 or any reference to any night journey. The furthest mosque simply doesn't make any sense as an epithet for the Jerusalem temple. I mentioned before that the Quran affirms the Torah. Well, that means the Quran recognizes the temple and the importance of the temple. Why would you refer to it as the furthest place of prostration? It makes it sound totally unimportant. Why should God take Muhammad to Jerusalem at all? If he's going to heaven, remember, heaven is directly over the Mecca, according to Islamic tradition. It would be taking him out of his way. He'd want to make a vertical journey. He doesn't need to make a horizontal journey to somewhere if he's directly underneath the gardens of paradise.
That's a very good point there, yeah.
Paradise. I've got a little graphic here. There he goes. There's a horizontal journey, and there's the vertical journey. The horizontal journey makes no sense at all. He could be beamed up from anywhere.
Yeah.
And finally, why does 17:1 not mention the ascent to heaven? It only mentions going to the furthest mosque. It doesn't mention the ascent to heaven or meeting God, which is, you might have thought, by far the more interesting part of the story. It would be the equivalent of me going somewhere really exotic and meeting somebody very exciting. Say for example, I went to Dublin and met somebody very famous there, and then wrote a postcard to someone telling them about it, saying I took the Piccadilly line to Heathrow Airport. It simply misses out the most important, the very thing that Ibn Ishaq is trying to tell.
Yeah.
So, what is the real meaning? I'm coming to a conclusion here. That's the last section. What is the real meaning of Surah 17? I'm going to tell you tonight what the real meaning is. Who carried his servant by night uses the phrase Azra, to travel by night, which occurs on 5 other occasions within the Quran. 3 of these relate to Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, which they do. They travel by night out of Egypt. And the other 2 relate to Lot taking his family out of Sodom before its destruction by fire and brimstone. And I can just give you the quotes of this. These are the parts on Moses. You see, set forth with, this is God talking to Moses, set forth with my servants by night and strike for them a dry path through the sea. Be not afraid of being overtaken and fear not. 26:52. And then we revealed to Moses, set forth with my servants by night, you shall indeed be pursued. And again, 44:23, set forth with my servants by night, you will indeed be pursued. In the case of Lot, the messengers to say, O Lot, we are the envoys of thy Lord. They shall not reach thee. That's the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So set out with thy family during the night. Let none of you turn round except your wife.
So it's clear then that
1565, set out with your family during your night and follow behind them and let nobody turn around.
we have the night journey connected with Lot and Moses. It's very clear from those references.
Those are the only 5 occasions, as I understand it, upon which this verb appears in the Quran. I would say it clearly has a very specific Quranic meaning of salvation from a people who are about to be destroyed. That's what happened when they took the Israelites away from Egypt. It's what happened when Lot took his family away from Sodom. It's not going on a jolly. It's not going on some sort of voyage of discovery and exploration. It is about getting away from somewhere that is about to become very, very hot. Interestingly, on the traveling by night, most people, including myself, find the dawn a very optimistic time. I always feel at my best, my most hopeful, if I can't sleep, when the dawn light comes. But not so for the Quran author. The dawn is invariably the time of divine punishment. There are several verses of the Quran where God smites people of Tamud and the people of Midian and so on, and morning finds them lying lifeless in their home. In fact, if we go back to the story of Lot, you may notice if one reads on 11:81, it says, indeed, the morning shall be their tryst, is not morning nigh. Morning is a bad time for the Quran author. For some reason, bad things happen just before the dawn or at the dawn. And it's also an allusion to the last day in Surah 97, which is the famous surah of the night of power, which Muslims celebrate by saying extra prayers during the night of power. The night of power is when a command is sent down by God with angels, and it seems to be a command for something, possibly the last day, and it ends with the ominous words, peace it is until the break of dawn. So that would seem to be an allusion to the last day. So carrying his servant by night means essentially it's a bit of what one might call, in my translation of the Quran, a moonlight flit. He's getting out of there before something bad happens. Okay.
Now we're pushing on 3 hours now, so we'll probably need to wrap up shortly.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know how much more.
One more slide, I think.
Okay.
I think this is my second to last slide.
Okay, no problem.
To know the meaning of 17:1, it helps to read forward a little bit, to read on for Surah 17, 4-7, which both allude to a past and future destruction of the Jewish temple. 17:4 says, and we decreed for the children of Israel, surely you will work corruption upon the earth twice. And then 17:5, we sent against you servants of ours, possessed of great might, and they ravaged your dwellings, and it was a promise fulfilled. So that seems to be a reference to the destruction of the dwellings of the children of Israel, probably a destruction of Jerusalem, not quite told which one, but perhaps it doesn't matter. 17:7, so when the other promise, so we decreed you would work corruption twice, when the other promise comes to pass, they will make wretched your faces and enter the temple as they entered it the first time, and utterly ruin whatsoever they overtake. So a past and a future destruction of the Jewish temple on the verses immediately following Surah 17:1. If I can borrow one of J. Smith's catchphrases, are you beginning to get it yet? Or are you beginning to see it yet?
It sounds to me they have been influenced by some Jewish writing or other.
To me, I think by this stage, Muhammad is losing interest in the religious element of this, and he's bending the ideas to suit his will. It would be my take on this. Okay. So what do we have? The person who carried his servant by night, a servant has been rescued from amongst a people who are about to be destroyed. Who are they? Or where are they? This is from the Masjid al-Haram, namely from Temple Mount in Jerusalem, or from Jerusalem. And 17:4-7, explain this. This is because Jerusalem, which has already been destroyed once, is about to be destroyed again. And the last part of the mystery is, where did he go to? Or where did these people go to? They went to the furthest mosque. And I would suggest this means it was to Yathrib. They left. These are the Jews who were exiled from Byzantium. Sorry, these are Jews who've been exiled from Byzantium, and they've fallen in with Muhammad, and he's taken them down to Yathrib, and he's training them up as an army, and he's developing his theological message about how the Israelites and the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Abraham, are now going to unite their forces and reclaim Jerusalem in the name of basically the Old Testament, the pure faith of Abraham, and boot out the Christians. This would be my reading of 17:1. And conclusion, the last bit. What have we learned over the last 3 hours? There are numerous points of similarity between the Quran's Masjid al-Haram and the Jewish temple. Both are called God's house. Both attach importance to the shape of the cube. Both have a strong association with Abraham. Both are the destination of pilgrimages called the Hajj, which involve animal sacrifice and circumambulations. Both are associated with the name Bakar. The chances of this being a coincidence and Muhammad not realizing, or the Jews who were with him not pointing this out to him, are, I think, they can be disregarded. This is a reference to the Jerusalem temple. This was literally the forbidden place of prostration because the Jews had been expelled from the Byzantine Empire. It wasn't forbidden to Muhammad. He might have been able to go there. It was forbidden to the Jews. That's where he got the name from. It was the place from which the Jews had been expelled and which they'd been told to fight to recapture. The temple was important to Muhammad because it was part of his plan to present himself as a new Moses, leading an Abrahamic alliance of Jews and Arabs, seizing the Holy Land, finally in fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham all those centuries ago. And this thesis, I would say, is supported by all the earliest accounts, such as they are, of the Arab conquest, the accounts of Sebeos, Thomas the Presbyter, Sophronius, the Doctrina Iacobi, and the Syriac Common Source. It also ties in with the church, or is supported by the Church of the Kathisma, and the construction of 3 buildings, one after another, on Temple Mount.
Excellent. Particularly the last point there is a good confirmation of the overall thesis. Paul, this is an amazing presentation. I really appreciate all the hard work that you've put into this, and I'm amazed that you were able to put so much together. It's been a real eye-opener, and I'm sure the audience will appreciate, all the new insights and all the various sources that you've brought together. It's a fantastic thesis, and I do encourage everyone to leave comments and give feedback to you about your thesis. It's been fantastic.
May I finally put in a plug for my website?
Oh, please do. Yes, yeah. I
have a website. I call myself the Islam Research Group, which is a bit strange. As a Muslim pointed out to me rather not very charitably, there's only one of me, which is true. There were more people when I started, but it's only really me that's active in this at the moment. But it's an aspirational title. If anybody wants to get in touch with me and join with me, I'd love to hear from anybody. And I own the domain islamresearchgroup.com, upon which I have put many items, many documents on this and other themes.
There is a group on Discord that is an Islamic research group run by a guy called Matt, who appeared on the channel a number of months ago. But the name of the Discord group escaped me, but it might be one that you might be interested in linking up, because there's quite a few on that, and some academics as well. So
they can make a bid for my domain name.
Yeah, well, it might be good to cross-pollinate and share your research. But it's fantastic, yeah. And I'd encourage everyone to check out your website, and I probably will do so as well. And the link I will add into the description for the video as well, just so people can click on it and go to it. But,
great. Thank you very much for the time, for the opportunity to share with you, and it's been great. It's been a great experience.
Absolutely, and you must come back again. There was a topic that you mentioned during the video earlier on in the show, and you said you'd like to come back.
There were two issues I would particularly quite like to address. One is the way the Quran deals with the Abraham's preparedness to kill his son, because the Quran does some very interesting things with that really repay a lot of study. It's a fascinating topic. And secondly, I wouldn't mind giving my views on what happened next, on where I see Islamic history folding out after Muhammad had gone. Why they say that history is written by the victors, but in this case the victors wrote a completely different history. They didn't have Muhammad capturing Jerusalem at all, and I'd like to share my opinion about why Muhammad got buried.
Okay, that would be interesting. We will be in touch, and I'm sure we'll create an opportunity for that. Paul, thank you very much. And again, I just encourage everyone to leave your thoughts below, and I'm sure you'll be willing, as I am, to respond and follow up on the points.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye.